Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning from your southern Alberta or other places. Ottawa, I see already in the chat, and we welcome you here. During this time of social and physical distancing, SACPA believes it's important to keep engaging with the public on issues of the day, and in order to do so, we are very thankful for the continued support we receive from the University of Lethbridge, Shaw Spotlight, and the Lethbridge Herald. Our speaker today is Julie Marshall, and the topic is This is no ordinary World Food Day, addressing global hunger in a time of COVID. Julie Marshall has worked as a Canadian spokesperson and communications officer for the United Nations World Food Programme for over 14 years. She's based here in Canada, and I believe that is in Ottawa, but has seen WFP operations firsthand in a number of countries, including Pakistan, Ethiopia, Bolivia, Sri Lanka, Honduras, and Haiti. This experience has given her the opportunity to see how the WFP delivers food assistance in emergencies and how working with communities improves nutrition and builds resilience in the countries the WFP serves. This is a very exciting time for the World Food Programme, as they have just received the Nobel Peace Prize for 2020. Congratulations, Julie, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction and your and setting me up nicely there. First of all, I have to address the Nobel Peace Prize. We are deeply honored at WFP. It's something that's really important because for us, it's going to be putting the world's hungry at the center of the global agenda. It shines a light on 690 million people who go to bed hungry every single day, and it highlights the hard work and sacrifice of present and past WFP staff who over the last 50 years have really made the organization what it is. And Canadians can be proud and share in this recognition as well. Canada has been and continues to be one of WFP's most important donors. So I know that many of you may not know who we are, so I really wanted to take this time today to explain who we are and what we do and how the pandemic has really impacted the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. So WFP is the world's largest humanitarian organization. We reach around 100 million people with food assistance in 88 countries around the world. We have unrivaled experience to get the job done quickly at scale and in the world's most difficult environments. We have more than 18,000 staff, most of which are working in the field. And these national staff are the backbone of our organization. They're sharing their experience to help WFP reach the most vulnerable. We partner with over 1,000 national and international NGOs and UN partners to provide food assistance and tackle the underlying causes of hunger. We have a vast supply chain network that enables us to quickly deliver life-saving assistance anywhere in the world. On any given day, we have around 5,000 trucks, 30 ships, and 90 planes delivering food and food. And we receive most of these contributions from governments, but also from private companies and individuals. And we can be proud that Canada is one of our largest donors, and they've supported us over the last 50 years. In emergencies, when there is an emergency, WFP is often the first on the ground and providing assistance to victims of war, drought, floods, and natural disasters. When the emergency subsides, WFP helps communities rebuild their lives and livelihoods, and we work to strengthen the resilience of people and communities affected by crisis by applying a development main food crises are in conflict zones. Places like Yemen, where we're feeding around 12 million people, or South Sudan, where we're reaching 5 million, or Syria, where there's an ongoing conflict, where we continue to reach over 4 million people every single month. Conflict forces millions of people to abandon their crops, their homes, their jobs, putting them at risk of hunger or even famine. And women and children are especially vulnerable here in these situations. And WFP recognizes this and builds our programs to respond to their unique needs. Climate change is another main driver of hunger. Floods, storms, droughts increase hunger by destroying land, livelihoods, crops, food supplies, affecting people's lives and livelihoods. And it's especially smallholder farmers who lose their livelihoods, and they can lose it in one major storm. So WFP saves lives in emergencies, but we also change lives using sustainable development, addressing the root causes of hunger so that communities can thrive in the long term. And changing lives really means strengthening communities using food. So we find out why a community is hungry, and we work with our partners, help the community to rebuild their infrastructure so they no longer need outside help, giving people food assistance while they're working on their own projects. The community may need a road to get crops to market, or correct or water irrigation systems or ponds to help crops or livelihoods or livestock grow. We feed communities while they're doing this work, while they're working on their own infrastructure. WFP also reaches around 18 million children in school with a nutritious meal. The idea is that well-nourished and healthy school children are better equipped to learn, fulfill their potential as adults, and participate in a country's development as a productive citizen. And we know school meals can increase enrollment. We see higher attendance. School feeding removes barriers for girls' education, nourishing them through childhood and adolescence, helps them stay in school, and provides an incentive for families to send their girls to school rather than make them work or marry early. Sometimes this can be a school meal can be the first and only nutritious meal of a day. For families, the value of a school meal can be the equivalent of 10% of the household income. For families with several children, this can mean, a large saving. I met a family in Bolivia. It was a single father who had 5 small children. All the children went to the local school, feeding to the local school, and received a nutritious meal first thing in the morning when they got there and during the day. And this saved so much money for the father himself. He didn't have to feed them maybe just one meal a day. And when we visited his house, the only thing he had in the kitchen was an onion. So these school meals are really important to the world's disadvantaged. So we also use take-home rations to keep adolescent girls in school. And this can be in the form of a bag of rice or cooking oil that is given at the end of a term when the girl stays in school, or sometimes boys stay in school longer. But it helps for parents to continue to send their girls or boys to school. And something else we do is we use homegrown school meals. And this is where we work with local smallholder farmers, mostly women's associations. And what we do here is we gather together smallholder farmers, again, women, to form their own group, and we bring them together, working with our partners, giving them the tools and the knowledge that they need to grow a more nutritious crop, better quality, and a bigger yield. And then WFP can purchase that food from them and take it down to the local school feeding program where we're feeding their children. And this really helps women grow their own business, as well as their children get fed a nutritious meal. So right now, WFP is working in more than 100 countries to set up sustainable national school feeding programs. And WFP's ultimate goal really here is to encourage and facilitate national government ownership of these programs, a tradition that has already happened in 44 countries. So this is really important. So it's okay to start these programs and to be feeding children, but the idea is that we want to be handing over these so that they're self-sufficient. And Canada has been a really strong supporter of WFP school meals, contributing multi-year funding to schools in places like Syria. And in this particular school feeding programs in Syria, we employed local women to come in and pack the school lunches. We reached out to the local farmers and the local bakeries and purchased the local produce to go into the school meals. And this obviously, for the child as they're returning into school, gives them some stability and some hope, as well as a nutritious meal, and obviously an income for the women and the farmers and the bakeries. So it's a win-win. But to get to zero hunger, food is often not enough. We need to provide food assistance in emergencies that save lives, but also the right nutrition at the right time can help change lives and really break that cycle of poverty. So, where possible, food should be fortified to address the needs of the population. And WFP helps communities to fortify their own food or their local produce. What we saw in Afghanistan was that poor families were eating mostly bread and tea. So WFP worked with the local bakeries, making sure that their bread flour was fortified, making sure that these poor families, when they purchased the bread, were getting the nutrition that they needed. And WP also uses ready to eat food, something like this. This sort of product, you just tear the top off and squeeze out the paste. And this is ideal for small children over 6 months old to supplement breastfeeding. It has all the nutrients and vitamins that a young child needs. This particular package, the food was purchased and procured within Pakistan and produced in a factory within Pakistan as well for the local community. And what we'll do is we'll work with the private sector, companies from around the world that has the knowledge to produce this kind of product, something that will sit on, could be on the back of a truck or in a warehouse in hot or cold countries for weeks or months at a time, something that's inexpensive. So this is something that we work with the private sector on. We also use micronutrient powder. So again, you tear the top off and you add this to food. It doesn't change the taste or the look of the food, but something that doesn't have a lot of nutrition in it, maybe a school meal where they don't have the nutrients available to them, this will add it to their meal, and obviously for families as well. Again, very nutritious and not very expensive. These also are high energy biscuits. These are really good either in school feeding programs when you haven't got what we call wet feeding, when we can't cook on the premises. But these are also ideal in emergencies situations as well. So somewhere like Haiti, where people they don't have access not only to food, but to clean water or to cooking facilities. Simply sharing these high energy biscuits with children will give them all the nutrients that they need throughout the day. So when food is available in the market, but people are too poor to access this, to access the food, WFP uses cash-based transfers, giving cash instead of food. Now, a good example of that are for Syrian refugees that are staying in Lebanon and Jordan. WFP uploads around $25 per person per month onto what looks like a debit card similar to this. And basically, this gives the beneficiary the dignity to go into a WFP designated store and purchase the food that they need. They can purchase eggs, vegetables, fresh fruit, something that wouldn't typically be in a WFP food basket. But what it's also doing is injecting that cash into the local economy. That storekeeper now needs to hire more people for the influx of new customers that he's going to receive or she's going to receive. They need to reach out to the local farmers and the local bakeries to make sure that they have the produce that these people are going to buy. And in 2019, just last year, WFP distributed $2.3 billion worth of cash into local economies through cash-based transfers. So these digital cards can also work with our partners. So again, Syrian refugees, I'm not sure if it was Jordan or Lebanon, there was a really bad sudden snowfall. So what UNICEF was able to do was upload cash onto the family cards where they knew there were small children, so that those families could then go and purchase warm coats for their kids to take them through the winter. So this is this is just a different way of doing things, of using cash instead of food when we can. And obviously, it saves on the carbon footprint. So we're not shipping food from maybe from North America right across the world to where it's needed when food is either locally available or in markets that can be purchased. So in 2019, WFP estimated that 2020 would be the worst year for hunger since World War II. And then COVID hit. So that was even before we had the pandemic upon us. So COVID-19 really has taken hold across the globe and has made the poorest people poorer and the hungriest hungrier. As millions of people lose their jobs and their livelihoods, many families are finding it really difficult just to put food on the table and feed themselves. WFP estimates the number of acutely food insecure people could increase 80% from 149 million pre-COVID to 270 million by the end of this year. And WFP is mobilizing to meet these new food needs. So WFP is hoping to feed 138 million people. Last year we fed 100 million people. So this is a huge jump for WFP to take this caseload on, and it will require the biggest humanitarian response of WFP's history. Now, food assistance is a critical part of any global response, but at any given time, food needs are growing. We're seeing that. And WFP's annual funding shortfall is widening. So at the moment, we're looking at a shortfall of around $5 billion to take us through to the end of the year. And if we can't bridge that gap and continue to reach people with effective response, we won't be able to save their lives. And WFP will have to be making some hard choices going forward. WFP's logistics support to the humanitarian community has really been providing the backbone of the global COVID-19 effort through a network of hubs, passenger and cargo airlifts. So not just for WFP food and staff, but for the humanitarian and health community at large. So ongoing restrictions on global movements, border controls, commercial transport disruptions still mean that usual routes for humanitarian and health organizations are really being disrupted. And that's why we've set up this network of global humanitarian response hubs. The system routes medical and humanitarian cargo and workers to the front lines with flights between global and regional hubs and onwards to priority countries. And since January, WFP has dispatched almost 65,000 cubic meters of cargo, enough to fill 26 Olympic-sized swimming pools to 167 countries. Now, these shipments will include personal protection equipment such as surgical masks, gloves, gowns, face shields, ventilators, emergency health kits. So it's the World Health Organization and UNICEF are the main users of the WFP service, but there's also 56 other organizations being served. Now, Canada has supported WFP's Common Logistics Service, but also the Royal Canadian Air Force supplied an A-17 plane in July to support our common services in Panama, transporting PPE equipment across the region. So we're very thankful again for for Canadian support there. Because of COVID-19 and the amount of people that we reach who are very vulnerable right across the world, we've really had to change the way we work. So if you think about the work that we might do in a refugee camp where we have food distribution points, instead of distributing food to thousands of people on one day, we may organize 10 distribution points over a number of days. Multiple locations, staggering attendance, redesigning layouts to allow for physical distancing. And what we'll also do as well is include health screening services, hand washing stations, and we also take that opportunity to educate community on prevention measures as well. So, WFP's takes the health and safety of our staff, our partners, and of course our beneficiaries very, very seriously. Now, the coronavirus has disrupted education systems across the world. Many of us have seen our own children not being able to go to school for a number of months. The forcing these closures has affected around 90% of the world's children, and we're witnessing the largest education crisis of our lifetime. Nearly 370 million school children missed out on school meals on which they depend, including 13 million children, 13, who receive WFP school meals. We know from previous crises that struggling families find it hard to send their children back to school, particularly the most disadvantaged families, often keeping their girls and boys sometimes home to help either look after other children or to look for food or to help in the fields. So right now, WFP has changed the way that we've worked in schools that are no longer open, and we're feeding or assisting around 7 million school children in 45 countries affected by the school closures with take-home rations, just making sure these families have some nutritious food. Now, despite producing most of the world's food, smallholder farmers tend to be food insecure themselves. Globally, they form the majority of people living in poverty. Helping to raise their incomes and improve their livelihoods holds the key really to sustainable food systems and advancing food security. The pandemic is placing significant stress on food systems, especially in failing states where food systems are already flawed or disrupted. All actors and livelihoods along the food chain are affected, from farmers to traders, distributors and retailers, as well as millions of consumers who rely on that food to feed their families. And we see tighter border controls, commercial transport disruptions mean that farmers can't get their crop to market. The markets are closed. Seeds and fertilizers can't get to the farmer. WFP helps smallholder farmers by supporting their access to forecast information, resources, services, and markets, helping to build their resilience and reduce their vulnerability to shocks and ongoing shocks. Also, we help them by investing in warehousing and storage, providing guidance on storing and handling food and facilitating their access to the private sector. WFP also supports smallholder farmers directly through local purchase. WFP serves around 15 billion meals every year. So it's important we use our purchasing power wisely. So no one government or organization can achieve zero hunger alone. More than ever, they need to be a global solidarity to help all people, and especially the most vulnerable, to confront the crisis facing the planet today: multiple conflicts, climate change, and COVID-19. So you can actually go to WFP's website, wfp.org, or follow us on our social media accounts to find out any more about WFP. And of course, I'm here to answer your questions.
Lovely. Thanks, Julie, for that wonderful talk. Wow, that's quite impressive. We have some questions in the queue, so I'll just jump right in. Our first question comes from Beth Mundell. In how many countries and in which grades are food incentives given at the end of term? Up to what age / grade is this done?
That really depends on the country. So first of all, we work in over 60 countries with our school feeding programs. And as I said, 100 where we're assisting governments. And it really does depend on what the issue is. So in some countries, there isn't a discrepancy where girls or boys are in school or girls aren't getting to school. But with the countries where they are, that's where we use those kind of incentives, those take-home rations, to either attract the girls or the boys to stay at school longer. So it really does just depend on the local community and what's happening on the ground and how we can best respond.
Okay, our next question comes from Mark Goodall. Food aid is very susceptible to fraud. For instance, I have seen sacks of wheat or flour clearly marked USD aid, not for sale in markets at Mali. Is this much of a problem for WFP? And if so, what steps are being taken to prevent this?
Right. So, I mean, it does happen, unfortunately, but the amount of food that we work with on a daily, weekly basis up for sale, what they do is they chip away at um, our authority, our trust that our donors have. So we have to be very careful. But we, as we said, we work in conflict zones. We work in some of the most dangerous places right across the world, and we do everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen. We make sure that we have in all the programs that we do that we're reaching the goals that are set out for that particular program or that particular operation, and we monitor each each uh, as we progress through the programs, we monitor to make sure it's reaching those goals and that, in fact, we are reaching the people where we need to. So we do our utmost to get food to where it should go. But in these difficult circumstances, 10 out of 13 of the places that we work in insecure areas, it's very difficult to do.
Our next question comes from Knut Peterson. Is WFP the sole or the main provider of food at most refugee camps around the world? Please explain how food is provided in these camps.
Again, it depends on the camp. We work with thousands of NGOs, either national or international, even Canadian NGOs around the world. So if Care Canada, for instance, has a system set up in a particular refugee camp and they need food to be supplied to them so that they can reach out, we partner with them in to do that, making sure they have the food that they need. And that's why it's important as well. Although WFP was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, we're hoping that this award will help us get more funding, will bring us to the attention of the media and the general public, and give us the food that we need so that we can continue to supply our partners that do the important work in the field. So I couldn't say, who runs what in which camp. It's all different around the world. It depends on who has a good program and how we can work together, and that's how we work on the ground.
Our next question comes from Timothy, who is the reporter for the Lethbridge Herald. The problem seems immense. How do we move forward given the extent of the problems we face in the world, and what can Lethbridge residents do?
That's a good question. On a personal, individual note, you can find out more about hunger, global hunger. You can go to our website and find out about the work that we do. You can share it on your social media accounts. As a journalist, you can write about the work that we do, or the 690 million people that go to bed hungry every single day. And that sort of attention will hopefully continue to bring in funding from the Canadian government. We'll encourage private sector partners to work with us on sharing their expertise, sharing their funds, working, but also individuals. Individuals can make a big difference. We actually have an app called Share the Meal, which is downloadable. It's free, and you have it on your phone, and you can literally just share a meal, one meal, with a child from either from Syria, from Yemen, or from Lebanon. You can choose and just make that difference, either one meal or a week's worth of meal, and that you can see how that goal is met. If we're trying to reach 100,000 children or a school feeding program, you can follow the response there as well. So as an individual, you can make a contribution by sharing your knowledge, sharing your networks, but also sharing funds as well.
Our next question comes from Laurie Schultz, although she says later on that she does believe you just answered the question, but I'll ask it anyway. You mentioned partnering with UNICEF. Does WFP partner with other NGOs?
Yes, as I said, no. UNICEF and other UN agencies. So our main partners can often be in a refugee setting, UNHCR, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, UNICEF, in school feeding programs. They're a great partner where we work together on the nutritional and health of the children that we serve. So as a partnership, we can bring in the food, and UNICEF as an organization can bring in either vaccinations or deworming or education on healthcare, that sort of thing. So when you bring people together or children together at a school, it's an ideal place to then to reach out to them and feed them. But also at a refugee camp as well. If there's an emergency, a fast onset emergency, working together with NGO partners and UN agencies mean that when someone is looking for, we can find out what their needs are, first of all, and make sure we respond together to get those needs. And our humanitarian logistics service, as I said, doesn't just move our food across the world and our staff, but the humanitarian communities as well. So that's an important issue.
Our next question comes from Terry Shillington. And I think you talked a little bit about it, but does Canada contribute as a nation? And if so, how much?
Yeah, Canada is one of our largest donors, and they have been supporting us for around 50 years. I don't know all of the history, but I know it's been 50 years. In 2019, they were our 7th largest donor. So this is really important. And again, and sorry, how much? Canadian dollars last year, they gave us over 250 million. So that's really important. But what is also important is Canada is one of our board members. Is making sure that we have multi-year funding. So when we start a program, when we open a school feeding, that the funding is there not just this year and this season, but will continue over the next couple of years. We can build a program better when we know we've got a few years to do it and make it more sustainable. They're also, as a donor, they've supported our school feeding programs, our humanitarian emergencies, given us timely contributions to make sure we can react quickly. Sometimes it has to be overnight. We have to get to people very fast. But also with our our development work as well, which is just as important, because what we try to do as we save lives in humanitarian situations is use a development lens there, so that we're not going back and saving the same lives over and over, but we are changing lives of people so that they don't need our help anymore. Canada is a great donor.
Lovely to hear. Our next question comes from Henny Mundo. How does WFP work with the Red Cross in disaster relief situations?
They're a very strong partner of WFP, Red Cross and Red Crescent. Because I'm not working on the ground, my job here is actually in Canada. I don't have that much experience, and I haven't seen them working together. But when we were looking at what was happening in Syria and the war there in the first couple of, right through, they continue to be a very strong partner, not just in Syria, but around the world. But there, what we would do, we worked hand in hand. So they knew the communities on the ground. They knew they would work with us to get food to cut off communities. We used our trucks, their trucks, and we worked together. So it was a very much a partnership, and that's one response that I was very much aware of as we followed what was happening in Syria. So a very close partnership, as we do with lots of the Canadian and global NGOs and local NGOs as well.
Then Henning has a comment that he says that, as earlier stated, Mark Goodall asked this query, but Henny also observed US aid not for sale wheat in Swat Valley of Pakistan and the local markets for sale. So that's more just a comment. The next question comes from Bev Mendel. You indicated impending $5 billion shortfall. What fundraising is done? Who are the major donors? Individuals, countries, others?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I need to say that 5 billion is US dollars. I often talk in US dollars when I'm talking to a Canadian audience. I do apologize, but it's yes. So the we are constantly the work that we do is fundraising. So when I'm talking to the media, and again, this goes back to how important the Nobel Peace Prize being awarded to WFP is, because it really has put us at the center of everybody's agenda. We've had notes of thanks from many prime ministers and organizations around the world. So people are taking notice, and it's really bringing the 690 million people that go to bed hungry every day right to everybody's house, to everybody's home. We're talking about it today. This is excellent that we are. So we're constantly fundraising. Our executive director is constantly moving from country to country, not so much now because of COVID, and his job is to fundraise and to make sure we have the funding that we need from governments, but also from the private sector. So we are always looking for, if not cash, for technical experience that can help us produce products, or to be more efficient or effective, to use the latest technology to make sure that it's at our fingertips, so that we are the most effective organization and we can reach millions of people at scale.
Our next question comes from Trevor Page. Although, as you've said, Canada is a strong supporter of WFP, its levels of ODA is well below Lester Pearson's recommendation of 0.7% of the GNI. Is WFP lobbying Canada to increase its foreign aid?
What can I say? Trevor, we would love to see that ODA is in Canada and across the world. I think the UK and a couple of Nordic countries have reached that amount, and it was a Canadian. It was a Canadian that actually that pushed for that, Pearson, I think it was. So this, it was something that we would love to see, because then we wouldn't have to be fundraising all of the time. When we start a project, when we start feeding people, we don't have to start making choices. When we go to a refugee camp, we don't have to decide that, okay, do we cut from 100,000 just feed 50, or do we cut the rations in half? Do we have to do both? Who gets fed and who doesn't? So we would very much like to see ODA increased Canada and across the world, and to have the 5 billion funded shortfall met.
Okay, our next question comes from Knut Peterson. The United States, under its present president, has withdrawn from several world humanitarian organizations. Has that affected its support for WFP?
It actually hasn't. I don't follow the funding from other countries as closely as I do Canada, but what I can tell you is that the funding under this administration has actually increased to WFP. Again, I couldn't quote the exact figures. It is all available online. You can see how much funding came from the US over the last couple of years. But what I can confirm is that, yes, we are getting more funding from this particular administration.
Our next question comes from Laura Schultz. Does the WFP partner with any other NGO whose focus is to provide contraceptive health, particular for women?
Yes, we do. We work with the one that I know of is UNFPA. Yeah, that's correct. And we work with them. Sorry, and it's not necessarily contraception. It is health knowledge. So what we'll do is we'll work with an organization such as them maybe in our school feeding programs, sharing knowledge, or where we bring women together, maybe in our health centers when women are coming, when they are pregnant or nursing and they're coming to collect their nutritious products from WFP. We might work with with different organizations and partners. As I said, when you get people coming together, we use that point, or that meeting point, to not only share the food that we need, but also we can then speak to women about their health needs, about their nutritional intake. And sometimes what I've seen in the countries that I've visited is we don't always give women that are coming into the clinics food for the next 3 months. We give them enough food for a month so that they keep coming back, and we can keep an eye on their pregnancy or keep an eye on their babies to make sure they're getting the food that they need. So we use those different touch points to bring in our partners. So it's not the work that we do, but we might be working side by side.
I have a question, if that's okay. You mentioned that during the COVID crisis, children aren't going to school, which is really impacting their ability to have a meal, a nutritious meal. And you mentioned the cash cards. So are the cash cards a way of mitigating some of that, or do you have other ways to mitigate that these children are no longer getting their meal or their meals at school?
It depends on the country. It depends if the food is already in the country and it's available. In some cases, we had food situated at the schools, ready to facilitate school feeding programs, and then we would give a certain amount of food, and the community would bring in other nutritious food to add to that. So if the food's already there, what we saw in Honduras, for instance, was that the teachers actually got on motorbikes and took the food as safely as they could to the communities and to the families, and delivered what was left of the school meals over to the families because they desperately needed it. So it would depend on the circumstances. So in countries where we are working with homegrown school meals, so we are reaching out to the communities, to women's associations to gather that food. We continue to do that where we possibly can, because those women need that business, they need to sell their crops, and we need that food. And then we will deliver it either to the schools when they reopen safely, or through delivering as a food distribution point. And if we don't have the food available for whatever reason, then we can actually give cash to the families. So this obviously just makes it, in some cases, more easy and safer to get to the families. They still have to go to the store, but obviously with safe distancing and social distancing, we can take care of that issue as well.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Mary Shillington. With the cash cards, do you think there is abuse of these, i.e. stolen cards, sold cards, etc.?
Yeah, you do have to be very careful, and we make sure we have the knowledge before deciding whether we're using a debit card, whether we're giving cash at like an ATM, whether we're giving vouchers, and how we work with the community to verify who is picking up that cash card. So what we've done in the past is we've used iris scans. We're using those in Lebanon and Jordan. So it may be that we're not using these cards specifically. A woman will simply walk into the store and use her eye. She doesn't need to carry anything with her. And that is an excellent way of making sure that that's her entitlement, and she will take that food home and it does not get given to anybody else. And we also use any technology that's available to us that we can use in the field. So there's biometric scan, there you go, as well as the iris scan. We give cards as well, but again, it comes down to if we're using markets, if we're using it in urban settings, and how these can be used in the stores, or in some cases just a marketplace. So it depends, but we have checks and balances against everything that we do.
Laurie Schultz, how does one contribute financially to the WFP? Would you provide contact coordinates, website or phone number, please?
The best way it depends on which way you're comfortable with, but please go online. I think that's obviously the best way and the easiest way. You can contribute through WFP.org. We do have a new office in Canada. You will get a tax receipt if you request one. Just follow up with me, or as you make your donation. But also there are other ways to contribute through the Share the Meal app. Is another way to go. So we're very welcome any contributions.
Lovely. Our next question comes from Knut Peterson. Arguably, it is in everyone's interest to support people in their own countries to lessen the need for people to migrate, often ending in refugee camps. That's it.
Okay. Well, I can talk to that a little bit. I mean, people typically don't want to leave the country that they're in. And we did a survey of Syrian refugees as they left Syria and asked them why they left. And we wanted to know what the causes were, what made them leave the country that they didn't want to. What we found out was very often they would leave their home and move 5, maybe 6 times to family members, losing more belongings as they go, no income, no way to support themselves, until with desperation they would leave the country. And what we saw in the survey, it was a pretty informal survey, but it told us that they left because of insecurity. So they were scared of the groups of their families being hurt, but they also moved because of hunger. And what we saw as well was I'm trying to think what year it was. Um, there was a food crisis, and we didn't have the funding available to put on our debit cards for the Syrian refugees. So we were having to make choices. Again, do we cut the amount of money, which we did? We cut it down to $13 rather than 25, and then we cut out just right down to the bare minimum. But what we saw was people were migrating. So it was Germany that came forward, and what they decided was it was cheaper to give 50 cents to keep a refugee in the family and refugee in the country that they wanted to stay in and feed them through the World Food Program than $50, which is what it will cost if they arrive on their doorstep. So, you can think about food different ways, but if I think about my family, I'd do whatever it took to feed them. And if that meant I had to leave, it would be my last resort, but I would do it to feed my family. So, keeping people where they want to be, either through emergency relief or, more importantly, and much better, looking at the long-term causes of hunger and helping them that way.
Knut's second part to the question came in, so it's actually okay.
Oh, there is. Okay.
It came in. There's often a little bit of a delay on YouTube, so I think it got stuck in the delay. So I'll read the whole question out again. I'll start at the beginning and I'll read it again.
Okay.
Arguably, it is in everyone's interest to support people in their own countries to lessen the need for people to migrate over, often ending up in refugee camps. Is WFP able to accommodate volunteers in the field? And if so, how extensive is it being taken advantage of?
That's a good question, and it would depend on the country. I actually don't believe that we facilitate volunteers, but I could be wrong on this. It's a very good question. Um, I'd have to come back to them on this one. I don't believe it does, especially in conflict zones, in the insecure places that we work. I really can't see that we do that, but I couldn't say for absolutely certain, so I might have to come back to them on that one.
Well, maybe it's good that his second half of the question didn't come in,
Yeah.
because how you answered it initially was very interesting. Our next question comes from Mark Goodall. How has COVID affected your operations?
Well, they've affected us right across the board, from the increased amount of hungry people in the world. So we're having to stretch, having to change the way that we work, whether that's in a food distribution point. But what we've seen as well is the face of hunger has changed. So people in urban settings are hungry. People that we weren't addressing or didn't need our help before are finding themselves in need of food assistance. So what we're doing there is very often using cash-based transfers, because that's a way of not only helping the beneficiary, the person that needs our support, but injecting that cash into the much needed local economy. So, in everywhere that we work, we look at what is the best way to deal with this situation. There has to be food available in the market for us to give cash in the first place, in whichever form. But where there is, cash of food available, this is a way to help in two different ways. So it's affected us right across the board. We've never been so busy. I've never been so busy. And our, the more people are hungry. So, and the people that are suffering the most are the poorest. The people in Yemen, there's 20 million people in need of food assistance or humanitarian assistance. We're only reaching around 12, 13 million every single month. But we look at the health systems there are on their knees. Women are scared to go to the health clinics in places like DRC because they're worried that their children will catch COVID. And what will happen is they're not getting the either the food that they need, the nutritious food, or they may not be getting the injections and vaccinations they need. We could see an increase in something like measles, preventable diseases, because women are scared to take their children to a health clinic. So it has all of these knock-on effects as well.
Okay. Beth Mendel has a comment. A local shop, local being Lethbridge, Alberta, a local shop, Umami, has the share the meal option for meals.
Whoa.
Yeah. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'd love to hear about that. Let's connect after this call because I would love to hear about that. And it's something that she's doing within the store?
I guess so. Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good way. I mean, when we talk about the enormous problem, the amount of people that are hungry, they're huge figures that I continue to use. But when you know that you can make a difference to one person or to one family, and very often I use to share the meal when I've got my family together. So, say I'm just sharing this meal here on Thanksgiving. It's an important time for us to share a meal with a family that we don't necessarily know. And then you share that information on your social media and encourage other people to join in as well and share a meal with for either a month or for a week, or it makes us feel better, and it makes us realize that just that one thing can make a difference. That $1 or whatever it takes that you did donate can make a difference to somebody's life.
Our next question comes from Trevor Page. Tell us about one of the most memorable stories from your visit with WFP operations overseas.
Okay, that's a good one, Trevor. There's lots. I think for me, it was my first trip to Ethiopia, and I have 4 children. So for me, I was very apprehensive about going to the school feeding programs. This particular one had about 900 children in the school feeding programs, and they showed me how they'd started with a couple of hundred, and then they introduced school feeding, and it just grew. And the kids were lovely, and I was very moved, and I thought this was great. But the very next day, we went to what we used to call, this was a while ago, about 10 years ago, what was called a merit program. It was basically food for assets program, where we work with partners on degraded lands, working with smallholder farmers, showing them or sharing our expertise with the local university students who would then take that knowledge to the different communities. And it was basically, they took us to a community where I could see a before and after. And it was a hill that had been terraced. They showed me how and why they terraced, why the crops were growing, the ponds, the beekeeping, the diversified crops. And I was surprised that that had a bigger effect on me than seeing all these small children. And what struck me was a grandfather came up, and he had a donkey and a child on the donkey, and he was taking the child to work. And in my mind, that was a very proud grandfather with his SUV taking his kids into school and showing me that he didn't need WFP anymore. He had, after the few years that he'd worked with the Canadian funded program, had changed his farm. He'd got down to no stock, and he'd lost all his goats, but now he had goats. He had a donkey for his child to go to school. He was very, very proud of the fact that he didn't need us anymore. And I think it surprised me, but that was it. That was the story that I've carried with me. But there's lots of those. I could go on.
You and Trevor both, I'm sure.
Yes.
Knut Peterson, one of the big problems facing local producers in developing countries is competition from cheap, subsidized food imported from the developed part of the world. Please comment.
Yeah, and that's you're right. And in WFP initially would transport food from one side of the world to the other. So we would have a surplus in North America that was, this seemed like a really good idea, and it was at the time to ship that food across. But it isn't now. What we see is we have this huge purchasing power. So why not use it to actually reach the smallholder farmers, the ones that are, there's 500 million of them that are hungry, that are the poorest of the poor. So let's help them and purchase their food, help them grow a better crop. And we don't do this alone. This is done with with partners like FAO and other NGOs that help share their knowledge, just like the merit program I saw in Ethiopia, share their knowledge and change their lives so that we can then purchase that product from them and take that to their local school feeding. And I think it was one of my favorites as well. Okay, so another story, this again was Bolivia, and it was a woman's association. And she said, I used to sell my produce over the fence to a guy with a truck, and he would take it to the market and he made all the money. But now she was president of this women's associations. Hundreds of women got together, and after I think it was just 3 years, they purchased their own processing plant. And they weren't just selling food now to WFP for the school feeding, but they were selling it in the local market and in the supermarkets and further out from their region. So it makes a huge difference when you purchase food locally like that and not bring it in from other countries.
Graham Smith, who's joining us from Ottawa today. I have Sri Lankan children's artwork called the Jackfruit Paintings, inspired by the UN to promote plantations which were producing food by the time the tsunami struck. So that's a comment by Graham.
Graham, I've actually been to Sri Lanka. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I love candy, and I'll go back with my family any day. And it's actually a Canadian, Brenda Barton, who's the country director there. And what I saw there was the problem wasn't so much the lack of food, but the lack of nutrition. And it's something that's very important to WFP, working in the healthcare system or within the health clinics, making sure women and adolescents, girls, get the nutrition that they need, and in school feeding programs. And that's what I visited there as well. It's pretty amazing.
His second part just came in. Can you tell me if I can use them for fundraising or who to contact?
I think it's a great idea. Contact me, and I'll see if I can connect with Brenda, and that would be great. Yeah, let's talk.
I'll make sure the two of you are connected.
Thank you.
That seems to be it for the questions. I have Beth Mundell. Thank you so much for your talk and the invaluable work you do with the WFP. Laurie Schultz, Julie, thank you for your very informative on-the-ground work at the WFP. Congratulations on the Nobel Peace Prize, very well deserved. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the work that you do. Before we end the live stream, do you have a take-home message for us, please?
I just think it's important that when I think of the Nobel Peace Prize being awarded to the World Food Programme, I think it's really important to understand why and who it belongs to. It belongs to our partners on the ground. It belongs to our donors like Canada and other international donors. It belongs to the staff who put themselves on the line every day to make sure people are fed. But it belongs to the people that go hungry every day and just putting them in the spotlight. So I'm hoping that this talk and the other media interest that we've generated around this award will continue to do that so that we can raise funds and close that gap, continue to feed people.
Excellent, thank you. And one last thank you from Mary Shillington. Thank you so much, Julie. I learned a lot this morning.
I hope you did. Thank you.
Okay, and by then we'll end the stream. Just a reminder, next week our session is thank you for your service, how well are we recognizing and supporting Canadian Armed Force veterans as they re-enter society with Brad Hagen and Wayne King. So we look forward to seeing you all next week, Thursday. Thank you.